The old ranch stood like a stubborn relic against the dying light of the Texas evening, its silhouette jagged against a horizon painted with rust and violet. The wind whispered through the skeletal remains of barbed wire fences, carrying with it the smell of dry earth and a storm that hadn't yet broken. I hadn't set foot on Grandpa Hank's ranch in over 15 years, not since I was a teenager too restless to notice how much of a fortress this land had been to him. Now I was back older, sharper, carrying the weight of a black robe folded neatly in the back of my car. Judge Daniel Harper, sworn to uphold the law, though that oath didn't prepare me for the war I was about to face. The ink on Grandpa's wool was barely dry when she appeared, Karen Whitfield, queen of the subdivision HOA that had slowly crept up around the edges of the ranch like ivy choking out brick. She stormed into the property the way some folks barge into a courtroom, self-righteous, loud, convinced of their dominion. What she didn't know, what no one in this county yet realized, was that she had just trespassed on land that belonged to me, land I was bound to protect. And the irony? Sooner or later, she'd be standing in my courtroom, staring at me from the defendant's side. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out of my truck, the weight of memory pressing down on me as heavy as the dusk. Grandpa's ranch stretched wide and unyielding, fences sagging, barn doors hanging on rusted hinges, and a house that seemed to sigh with age. I was still letting it sink in, this was mine now, when a shrill voice cut through the evening. "Excuse me." I turned, already bracing myself, and there she was, Karen Whitfield. Blonde hair sprayed into defiance, oversized sunglasses perched like armor, clipboard clutched in manicured hands. Even at a distance, her energy screamed intrusion. "This property falls under Oak Ridge Subdivision Association guidelines," she declared as though she were reading a verdict. "And you, sir, are in violation the moment you stepped onto it." I blinked. "Violation?" "Yes," she snapped, heels stabbing the gravel like gavel strikes. "We have strict covenants about lawn upkeep, structural integrity, and livestock. And this," she swept her hand across the sprawling ranch, "is not compliant." I almost laughed. This land had stood since 1873, long before Oak Ridge even had its picket fences. "Ma'am, this isn't part of your subdivision. My grandfather's deed covers every acre here." She stiffened, eyes narrowing. "Deeds or not, our board voted last quarter to extend HOA oversight. You'll need to repaint the barn, re-level that driveway, and remove all," she squinted toward the corral, livestock remnants. There was no livestock. Just the faint smell of hay and the ghost of Grandpa's cattle herd. But Karen wasn't talking sense, she was flexing control. "Look," I said evenly, "I'm Daniel Harper. Hank Harper's grandson. This is my land now. Whatever your HOA rules are, they don't apply here." Her lips curved into something between a smirk and a snarl. "We'll see about that." And with that, she pivoted on her heel and stormed back down the gravel drive, her SUV's headlights flaring like a threat before she roared off into the night. Inside the house, the air smelled of cedar and dust. I ran my hand along the mantel where Grandpa's rifle once hung, felt the grooves of years carved into the wood. I should have felt peace, but Karen's voice clung to me like a thorn. The next morning, I found my first notice. Taped right onto the front door. HOA letterhead. Violation, failure to maintain lawn to subdivision standards. Correct within 7 days or face fines. My jaw tightened. I was no stranger to legal disputes. I presided over property cases nastier than divorce trials, but this? This was personal. I took the notice, folded it carefully, and set it on the kitchen table. The law was clear, the deed stronger than any HOA ruling. But I knew Karen. She wasn't just some nuisance with a clipboard. She was used to winning through persistence, intimidation, and sheer noise. And the storm she'd started wasn't going to stop here. 3 days later, I was repairing the sagging barn door when another car pulled up. Not Karen's, this time it was Tom Whitfield, her husband. A quieter man, gray around the edges, with eyes that avoided mine like they'd learned not to cross Karen's fire. "Judge Harper," he said softly, hands shoved in his pockets. I wanted to apologize. "For what?" I asked, brushing dust off my jeans. "For my wife. She gets ambitious. The HOA's been her project ever since the kids left for college. She doesn't mean harm. She posted a violation on my door for an acre that's been in my family since before this town had a name. Tom winced. I know. But if you push back, she'll push harder. That's just how she is. I studied him. The man was worn down, like a fence post battered by years of wind. She doesn't get to push here. He sighed, almost relieved to hear someone say it, and gave a small nod before retreating to his car. But by that evening, the war escalated. Trucks arrived. A crew, clearly hired by the HOA, started mowing down the wild prairie grass that had grown tall on the far edge of the ranch. When I confronted them, they shoved a work order into my hand signed by none other than Karen Whitfield herself. That was the final straw. I stood on that land, voice steady but loud enough to cut through the roar of engines. You're trespassing. This is private property. Pack up and leave before I call the sheriff. One of the men hesitated, glancing at the order. But Mrs. Whitfield. Mrs. Whitfield doesn't own this land. I do. And unless you want charges filed, you'll leave now. They left, engines sputtering with reluctance. But Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. That night, a storm rolled across the plains, rattling the windows and shaking the old ranch house. And as lightning split the sky, I saw headlights crawl up the drive again. Karen's SUV. She didn't knock this time. She barged right in, rain dripping off her coat, eyes blazing with fury. You think you can outstubborn me, Judge, she spat, her voice almost drowned by thunder. You've made a mistake. Because this isn't just your ranch anymore. This is Oak Ridge, and I own Oak Ridge. The storm outside roared, but it was nothing compared to the one standing in my living room. And in that moment, I knew, this wasn't just a property dispute. This was a battle for dominance. And Karen Whitfield had just walked into a courtroom where I held the gavel. The rain hammered the roof like 1,000 fists as Karen Whitfield stood dripping in the doorway, eyes sharp and unyielding. I'd seen hardened criminals try to stare me down from the bench, but Karen's glare carried a different kind of menace, a petty tyranny born of years unchecked. Mrs. Whitfield, I said evenly, closing the distance between us with slow, deliberate steps. You've just trespassed, again. You're on private property. You don't knock, you barge in, and you issue threats? You've crossed a line. She crossed her arms, rainwater pooling at her heels. This house, this land, it's an eyesore. My HOA has full authority over Oak Ridge, and I won't let one stubborn man ruin everything we've built. If you don't comply, we'll fine you until you break. Lightning slashed the sky behind her, casting her silhouette into a sharp shadow. For a heartbeat, the ranch felt less like a home and more like a battleground. Fine me? I asked, almost amused. You think you can bring the law down on me? Karen's lips curled. I am the law here. The words echoed, absurd and arrogant, yet her conviction made my jaw clench. You may run a homeowners association, Mrs. Whitfield, I said, voice like steel, but I run a courtroom. And I don't take kindly to threats. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, with something like recognition. But she masked it quickly, stepping closer, jabbing her finger at my chest. You'll regret standing against me, Judge Harper. No one wins against Karen Whitfield. By morning, the storm had passed, but the war had only just begun. I walked the property, boots sinking into damp earth, and found fresh evidence of sabotage. The north pasture gate had been cut open, fencing wire slashed clean as though by bolt cutters. A water trough had been overturned, its contents spilling mud across the grass. And nailed to the barn door was another notice, bold letters under the HOA letterhead. Final warning, non-compliance will result in legal action and property seizure. Property seizure. My stomach tightened. Karen wasn't bluffing, she'd escalated. I took the notice, shoved it into my truck's glove box, and drove into town. At Harper & Sons Diner, a place that still smelled of coffee and frying bacon at any hour, I found Sheriff Ed Larkin nursing his morning cup. A thick-set man with years carved into his face, Ed had been Grandpa's hunting buddy and the closest thing Oak Ridge County had to a neutral peacemaker. Danny, he said with a nod as I slid into the booth across from him. Heard you were back.
Sorry about Hank. Hell of a man.
Thanks, Ed, I said, keeping my voice steady.
Listen, I've got a problem. HOA problem. He chuckled, shaking his head. Let me guess. Karen?
Right on the first try, I muttered. She's trespassed, left bogus violation notices, even sent a crew onto my land without permission.
And now she's threatening legal action. Ed sighed, rubbing his temple. Karen's been running that HOA like a fiefdom.
Folks are too tired to fight her.
She's got influence, money, board members in her pocket. But she's not untouchable. She's crossed into criminal trespass, vandalism, maybe even harassment. I want to file reports.
Do it, Ed said firmly.
But brace yourself.
She's not going to take this lying down. And truth be told, he leaned closer, she's got a network of lawyers she uses to bully residents into compliance. She'll drag you through the mud if she can. I leaned back, a slow fire kindling in my chest.
Let her try. This land isn't going anywhere, and neither am I.
By the time I got back to the ranch, Karen had already launched her next attack. A moving truck idled in my driveway, men unloading pallets of paint buckets. Bright white, HOA-approved color.
I didn't even bother hiding my fury. What the hell is this? One worker, nervous but dutiful, pointed to his clipboard. Order from Oak Ridge HOA. Mandatory repainting of all exterior structures.
We were told to start with the barn. I took the clipboard, glanced at the forged authorization, and tore it clean in half.
Load it back up. Now.
Or I'll have the sheriff here in 10 minutes. The men exchanged wary looks but began hauling the buckets back.
And then, like a vulture circling, Karen's SUV appeared again.
She stepped out, sunglasses flashing in the midday sun, a smile as sharp as barbed wire plastered on her face. You're making this harder than it has to be, Judge, she said sweetly, though her tone dripped venom. You could have just followed the rules.
This isn't your kingdom, Karen, I shot back. And this isn't your land.
Her smile faltered, replaced by a hiss.
I'll drag you into court if I have to.
I let the silence hang for a beat before replying, my words precise.
And when you do, you'll be standing in front of me.
For the first time, her confidence cracked.
Just a flicker.
But it was there.
You, she whispered, realization dawning. You're
Judge Daniel Harper, I finished. Appointed by the state of Texas. You trespass again, you sabotage, you harass, and it won't be an HOA dispute anymore.
It'll be criminal charges. Karen's face twisted, fury battling disbelief. She opened her mouth, shut it again, then spat out, "This isn't over," before storming back to her SUV. As her tires spat gravel down the drive, I felt the air shift. The battle lines were drawn.
Days bled into nights, the ranch caught in a strange tension between silence and threat. Some mornings I found trash dumped at my gate, other nights I caught glimpses of HOA inspectors prowling the property's edge with flashlights. Karen was tightening the noose, one petty act at a time. But the town was beginning to notice. Word spread fast in places like Oak Ridge County, and whispers of Karen's war against the Harper Ranch carried from diner counters to church pews. Then came the letter. Official. Legal. Summons issued by the Oak Ridge HOA against Daniel Harper, alleging non-compliance with subdivision covenants, demanding penalties, repairs, and fines totaling nearly $50,000. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter heavy in my hands. For Karen, this was her endgame. She thought she'd cornered me. But she hadn't realized the one flaw in her plan. She'd brought the fight to a courtroom. And the judge waiting at the bench was me. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and old paper, the kind of place where time lingered heavier than dust. On the morning of Karen Whitfield's lawsuit against me, the gallery filled fast, neighbors, ranchers, townsfolk all drawn by the spectacle of Oak Ridge County's queen of the HOA going head-to-head with a Harper. I sat at the bench, black robe draped across my shoulders, gavel resting within easy reach. It wasn't just another trial, it was my trial, in more ways than one. And though I was sworn to impartiality, every fiber of me ached to deliver justice for Grandpa Hank, for this ranch, for everyone Karen had bulldozed in her climb to power. When the bailiff called the case, Karen marched in, her heels clacking like war drums. Behind her trailed 2 lawyers in crisp suits, armed with binders and arrogance. She wore victory on her face, like she had already won. But then her eyes lifted to the bench, saw me in the robe, elevated above her, and her stride faltered. "You," she hissed under her breath, though the microphones caught it. I met her glare with calm steadiness. Case number 2025-147, Oak Ridge Homeowners Association vs. Daniel Harper. Let's proceed. The gallery buzzed, whispers darting through the air like wildfire. Her lawyers opened with flair, waving photos of my neglected barn, the overgrown pastures, the blight of old machinery. They cited covenants, bylaws, and enforcement rights of the HOA, their words slick and polished. But every time they spoke of jurisdiction, I countered with deed history stretching back to 1873, signed and sealed long before Oak Ridge was more than prairie grass. Every time they mentioned bylaws, I reminded them of statutory law, property boundaries, county records, and the supremacy of state law over private covenants. It wasn't just argument, it was a dismantling. Piece by piece, I stripped their case bare, exposing it for the power grab it was. Karen sat stiff in her chair, jaw tight, eyes darting between her lawyers and me as if willing someone to reverse the tide. When it came time for her testimony, she strutted to the stand with that familiar fire in her eyes. "This ranch," she declared, voice quivering with self-righteousness, "is an eyesore. It lowers property values. It violates the harmony we've built in Oak Ridge. And no one, not even a Harper, gets to be above the rules." I let her speak, every word digging the hole deeper. She admitted to ordering crews onto the property, to taping notices, to extending HOA jurisdiction without proper county approval. Her arrogance blinded her, and the record captured it all. When she finished, her chin lifted high as if she'd struck a blow. I leaned forward, hands folded. "Mrs. Whitfield, do you understand that by entering private property without consent, ordering crews to perform work, and issuing fines without legal authority, you may have committed trespass, harassment, and unlawful enforcement?" The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Karen's face paled, then flushed scarlet. You can't." "I can," I cut in firmly. "And I will." The verdict wasn't dramatic, it was decisive. The court finds that Oak Ridge Homeowners Association has no jurisdiction over the Harper Ranch. All claims of covenant violation, fines, and seizure are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, evidence indicates potential criminal trespass and civil harassment by Mrs. Whitfield in her capacity as HOA president. This court refers those matters to the sheriff's office for further investigation. My gavel struck, sharp and final. Karen gasped, her mask of power crumbling in front of the town she once ruled. Her lawyers gathered their papers in silence, eyes avoiding hers. And as she stood, trembling with fury, the gallery erupted, not with jeers, but with applause. Neighbors who had endured years of her tyranny saw, maybe for the first time, that she could be beaten. That her crown was nothing more than tin. After the courtroom emptied, I stepped outside into the Texas sun. Sheriff Larkin waited, leaning against his cruiser, hat tipped low. "Well," he drawled, "never thought I'd see Karen Whitfield knocked off her throne." I exhaled, the weight of weeks lifting from my chest. "She'll lick her wounds, but she won't forget this." "No," Ed agreed. "But folks around here won't forget it either. You stood up to her, Danny. You gave this town its backbone back." I looked toward the horizon, where Grandpa's ranch lay steady and unyielding, its fields glinting gold in the late afternoon light. For the first time in weeks, it felt like peace. Grandpa used to say the land outlasts the noise, that storms come and go, but the soil remembers who stood firm. I'd stood firm. And as the wind swept across the courthouse steps, carrying with it the scent of prairie grass and home, I knew one truth settled deeper than law, deeper than legacy. This ranch wasn't just mine to inherit. It was mine to defend. And no storm, HOA or otherwise, was ever going to take it.